I want to bring in my panel this afternoon. It's Liberal MP Tim Wilson and Labor MP Ed Husic. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Afternoon.
Start with you, Tim. The Treasurer has urged companies to put profits back into their businesses to grow the economy rather than spending it on share buybacks and special dividends. Already a backlash, which I was just talking about there, from some corporate leaders saying, don't tell us how to run our businesses. Do they make a good point? Should the Treasurer be telling them what to do with their businesses?
We've had a couple of real corporate leaders say things publicly. I met or saw a business leader who was at the speech at the airport on the way up to Canberra today, and he took the completely different view, which was, to respect and understand the desires that the Treasurer has put forward, and critically, the focus, which is what we all want, is on improving productivity so that we can grow the economy and make sure more people are employed in higher-paying jobs. And that's the core focus of this government, and I think anybody would be surprised if that wasn't.
So is corporate Australia, in your view, failing on taking this strategy and on wage growth too?
Well, I don't think the Treasurer used that word, and I'm not going to use it either.
I'm not saying he used it, I'm asking you.
Well, no, but you're implying he is, and what I'm saying is neither he used it nor will I use it, because I don't think it's an accurate discussion. Every decision and every business needs to make strategic decisions, a mixture of where they want opportunity and growth, where they need to take defensive positions to make sure that they secure the best interests of the company in the long term as well. And I guess what the Treasurer is doing is encouraging business to be confident, to be optimistic, but to invest for the long run, not just for a profit cycle. And I think a lot of Australians want to see government behave in the same way, and I think ultimately the companies they're investing in, if you want long-term returns as well.
I'll ask this to you, Ed Husic. I know Labor's been critical of the Treasurer's speech, but doesn't he make a good point that if corporate Australia was to do this, we'd see some of the benefits that he describes, including perhaps wage growth?
A number of points. First, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, has no moral authority to make this argument, because when he was given advice on what should be done to improve wages outcomes by no one less than the RBA, which said that wage outcomes in the public sector needed to be lifted so that way it would stimulate wages growth, the government refused that advice, declined it, said that they wouldn't be doing such a thing, and then in a matter of weeks to go out to business and say what they're doing in one respect is no good because it will hold off the potential, the prospect of some sort of illusory wage increases down the track. This has no weight whatsoever. Secondly, he's whipping up an argument that's gone back as far as when Glenn Stevens was the RBA governor, appealing to the animal spirits in business and hoping that something would happen, and there's been no actual plan for stimulus. And unfortunately for Josh, hot air and opinion pieces do not make for economic stimulus. You need to have something there, and even if these companies did, on the remarkable instance, take his advice, there is no guarantee this would flow through to wages, because, as even Treasury has found, a lot of the CEOs that have been asked, would you pay more over the coming 12 months in wage increases, 40% said no. The government has no plan, and business certainly has no plan to improve the lot of ordinary Australians who deserve to get a pay increase.
Just follow up to you, Ed Husic. Last week, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd warned that Australia is at risk of recession. Do you think Australia is at risk of recession?
I think the hope is that we would have some sort of plan out of this government to be able to boost economic performance in the wake of what are obviously troubling signs elsewhere. We don't have that. I'm not going to play the game of trying to use the R word or not. I don't think that's helpful. But what would be helpful is if the government did have some sort of idea about what it would do to boost, in particular, wages for people who feel like they're not getting paid enough. What will it do to stop the instance, as we found in the last 12 months, nearly a double increase in the number of people holding down 4 jobs, back when there was a time that having one job was enough to pay the bills. There is nothing there to be able to help people that are struggling there. There is no game plan for productivity lift, and there's no game plan to actually lift economic growth above below trend performance, and this is a bad thing.
Tim Wilson, is it time to consider stimulus?
Well, this is a great misleading argument put forward by Ed, who, I mean, he's previously called the idea of having a budget surplus a vanity project.
No, under you it is.
Prudent economic management probably isn't something he's familiar with, but I'll clarify for him that it isn't a vanity project. It's core to confidence and investor confidence to be able to put money down and create new jobs. But more critically, we actually are engaging in forms of stimulus through tax cuts. It's just that we're saying to Australian households and families that we believe you should be empowered to make decisions about your own lives rather than it being boffins in Canberra dictating to people where money's going to be spent. So we are engaging in stimulus. We're just not doing it on the terms and the way that Ed would like. We're doing it consistent with the promises we took to the election, just like the so-called vanity project of a budget surplus, which we also said we'd deliver. And of course, the RBA has cut rates, interest rates, and that obviously has an effect as well.
Just quickly on the G7, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. No joint communique, as we know, and we knew it even before because French President made it quite clear. That's how tough things are at the moment. There's not even an attempt at a joint communique. The world has changed. The Prime Minister said it was up to the US and China, Ed Husic, to sort out the trade dispute. And of course, well, it ultimately is up to them. But what role should Australia be playing in trying to de-escalate here?
Well, obviously, we're trying to encourage both parties to see the sense that if they do resolve their differences on trade, that this will be good, not just obviously for their own countries, but for the world as a whole. Because there are a lot of people that are in an interconnected planet where so many economies rely on each other. Having this type of instability is not good. So clearly encouraging them to sort this out and sort it out quickly would make for better. But clearly now central banks are starting to factor in this level of instability, the concern that it might have on investors as well. The sooner we get it sorted out, the better.
What do you make of this one, Tim? Because, of course, this is something that is just getting, well, it's really ramping up more and more. I mean, we talk about de-escalation, but we've had a re-escalation. Are you concerned?
I think everybody's concerned about trade tensions and the tensions between the United States and China because ultimately as a country, well, one of them is our biggest investor, the other is our biggest export market. So we need and have an economic relationship with both. But I guess the role Australia needs to play is one where we're obviously not going to dictate the terms to either of the countries about how they're going to resolve it. But we can always play a constructive conversation in highlighting some of the issues and the consequences. And of course, you're seeing that on the markets around the world and including in Australia today. But also talking up the benefits of freer and more open trade, which is the basis of so much of our prosperity. And of course, we may be able to talk between the two parties from time to time, but it's probably best discreet and private to try and be towards a constructive outcome.
Just want to move on to these talks with PNG today. Ed Husic, PNG's Prime Minister, has suggested Australia give up $300 million a year to PNG in direct budget support. Do you think that should happen?
Well, I'd need to see I mean, that is a big call to make, and we'd need to see exactly what the details are. Clearly, the government is going to have a better position to be able to answer that, given that they'll know much more info about what was put to them.
But the principle behind it, I understand you're not the Treasurer. I bet you wish you were, but you're not. So what do you think of the principle behind this idea, particularly as we are clearly trying to deal with the rise of China in the region?
Well, based on some of the smug and patronising comment that we got from Tim earlier, I don't think he'd think I'd be in a position to be a Treasurer because they seem to know all the answers. So let's hear from them about what was said and what their position they will take.
No, I'm going to nail you down to this. Do you think it's a good principle?
I'm not going to answer. Look, it's an important relationship with the PNG. We need to find out what the terms are that were said, and clearly too how they would conform with what the World Bank has been advising in terms of how that is balanced or how they manage their budget. So we'll wait and see. But the government's there, ask them.
Yeah, I'm about to ask the government, as we call Tim Wilson the government.
Actually, I'm part of the parliament. I'm not actually in the government.
Well, you've said this before,
Really?
and let's not
You
have
sit
that
on the government
argument.
benches.
You are a member of the government.
I support the government. There's not a dispute about that. But the reality is that the government is made up of the executive and the departments. It's not made up of backbenchers. We're part of the parliament. And I just want to respond.
I would have thought, Tim, you'd be proud to be part of this government. I'm confused.
No, I'm a
Why the
supporter of the
distinction?
government, but the reality is that technically the part of the government is actually the ministers, not actually people who aren't ministers or part of the executive government. But I actually just want to respond. I mean, it just said before that my comments before were, quote, smug. All I was literally doing was quoting his own words back to him. But you continue to rattle them off because all I was doing was quoting back his own words to him. I realise they're uncomfortable because clearly he was...
If we could try and reduce the sort of political point scoring, which I think Australians are sick of, let's just get to the point.
I don't disagree, which is why...
Yeah, both of you. It's a comment, bipartisan comment made by a journalist. If I could just get to whether you think this is a good idea. Do you think it is?
Well, like Ed, I haven't seen the detail of it because these sorts of things are available to the government, not necessarily to members of Parliament automatically. But I'm cautious, is the honest answer. I mean, what I would want to see is what's the trade-off and the benefit. You know, the job of Australians isn't to underwrite the tax base or the revenue base, I'd say more correctly, of other countries. But we do have a responsibility in our own national interest to make sure that PNG is a successful country, obviously as our nearest neighbour. But what are the trade-offs? What's the reform that's going to come with it to make sure that it isn't part of an ongoing obligation that we end up inheriting?
OK. Ed Husic, ICAC has heard allegations of a Chinese billionaire giving $100,000 in cash to a senior New South Wales Labor official in what could be, of course, a breach of electoral funding laws. It's a pretty disturbing revelation. How do you reflect on it? Well,
obviously it's, concerning, and we want to get to hear more of what gets put before ICAC. And importantly, what it finds and what recommendations get made and how this gets managed. But clearly, people want to have transparency in terms of electoral funding to understand where, how much, what impact donations have. So clearly, we'll be waiting to see what else comes out of this process.
But of course, it's about your political party, and yes, it's before ICAC, as you say. I accept that, but you must be pretty disturbed by these reports. I mean, this shows a pretty toxic kind of situation, doesn't it, where this would even be something that's possible?
Well, we need to make sure that, obviously, election campaigns themselves are very expensive affairs. We need to be able to make sure that they don't continue to be so, so that we're not always reliant in such a big way on donations. And when these type of concerns get raised, we need to make sure too that we get to the bottom of it pretty quickly, and obviously we'll wait and see what comes out of the hearings themselves. And obviously it's just started today, and we need to see what how that all plays out.
I know some on your side are concerned about ICAC and the way that this is being handled. Do you have confidence in the system?
Sorry, that's a rather broad question. I'm confident that ICAC is there to perform its job, to do it to the absolute best of its ability, and it plays a very valued role. OK, that's the question. It's not that broad. Yeah. It's whether you trust that they're dealing with this fairly. That's really at the centre of the question. Tim, does this strengthen the case for a federal ICAC?
Well, I don't think so, because this is a state division matter around state divisions and how they operate, and that's mostly the structure around how political parties operate, or at least on, based off states. But, I mean, I think what this case is a very clear example of is deeply questionable behaviour inside the New South Wales division of the Labor Party. The question is merely, will it end here today, or will it continue to go on? And I guess that's what we'll all just wait and see.
Well, now that you've introduced politics into it, where I didn't necessarily take a partisan view, Tim, I might point out too that the Liberal Party has in times past had its own issues with political funding and donations. I don't need to mention certain names on air from your own division that you've been trying to sort out, and you also have similar sort of problems in terms of the scale of donations received, particularly in terms of this. It's affected us, and it also affects your side. The quicker we get to making transparency in election funding, and the way it's done, the better. But by all means, score your political points, and let's see how they ricochet back into your forehead like a rubber ball.
All right, we're going to leave the forehead there.
Well, he doesn't have
I'm
to
out of
say
time.
that and then have some sort of response. But I mean, and the reality is I didn't raise this topic, Ed. ICAC's looking at it. And if
you
there are
introduced
things
it
with
and
other political
suggested that
parties,
there
they
was an
should look at
issue.
those things too.
Sure. And, yeah, I absolutely
So I don't know what
encourage
rubber... The only rubber bullet is the one that's rebounded off mine and seems to be hitting yours. But anyway.
All right, no more bullets in this conversation because we're out of time. That's the way showbiz works, guys. We're out of time. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Liberal